Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to a very special first ever edition of the MMA Cash Cage podcast, the show where I break down MMA action and try to put a little extra money in your pocket. I'm your host, Tanner Martin, and today I'll be breaking down UFC 186 Johnson vs. Horiguchi. This card was originally scheduled to have the rematch between TJ Dillashaw and Renan Barao, but after Dillashaw pulls out with an injury, the co-main event moves up, and we get a new co-main event with Quentin Rampage Jackson taking on Fabio Maldonado, which just came back into fruition yesterday. So that is the new co-main event, and then third from the top, we have CB Dollaway taking on Michael the Count Bisping. Now, if you look at some cards that are coming up after this one, 187, 189, this isn't the most star-studded card that the UFC's ever put on, but there definitely is still some money to be made. So I'm going to break down the fights from the bottom to the top, and then at the end of the show, I'm going to give you my gambling plays for this fight. So without further ado, let's get into it. We open up the night with some strawweight action. UFC alum Randa Marcos taking on Ashlyn Daly. Ashlyn Daly is 15-5 overall, 1-0 in the UFC. But she just really hasn't fought in the UFC at least much competition at all. Obviously, one fight. Outside of the UFC, she has a couple decision losses. One to Invicta fighter Katja Kankampa, Barb Honchak, Rosie Sexton, and also a TKO loss to Sheila Gaff, who is currently in the UFC. She has a submission win over Jessica Ai, but that was back in 2011, and most recently a submission win in her UFC debut over Alex Chambers. For Daly, she's a fast starter. 13 out of her 15 wins are finishes, and out of her total losses, four of them are by decision. But the problem I see with Daly is she's not super technical, and she could be controlled in the clinch on the ground. Obviously, has that jiu-jitsu to be wary of, but against a good fighter with a strong top game like Randa Marcos, I feel that she can have some trouble and not be able to get off that jiu-jitsu game. When you look at Randa Marcos, 4-2 overall, but had some success in the Ultimate Fighter show with a decision win over the 3 seed Tisha Torres and a submission win over Felice Herrig. She lost her UFC debut, 0-1 in the UFC. Lost debut to Jessica Penne. It was a close fight. I do believe she did lose. It was a split decision. I thought Penne won the fight, but it was pretty close. And Penne is a tough fighter. For Marcos, she has crisp technical striking. I'm pretty impressed with her stand-up because she does have really good ground control. I feel that she just, compared to Ashlyn Daly, I think she has better conditioning and just more heart. The height and reach are basically identical, but I feel that Marcos will be able to control the center of the octagon and control the fight in the clinch and on the ground. I'm not sure that Daly's going to be able to get off a submission, and for that reason, for the first fight, I'm going to take Randa Marcos by decision. And I realized that I forgot to give the fight odds for this one. Randa Marcos minus 260 favorite to Ashlyn Daly's plus 220. I'm getting my fight odds off of 5 Dimes because they typically have MMA odds out earlier than anyone else. So for the next few fights, I'll be giving the fight odds when I announce the fighters. And with that, in our second fight, is also in the women's strawweight division. We have Valerie Letourneau, a negative 175 favorite, squaring off with Jessica Rakoczy, who is a plus 155 underdog. Letourneau's 6-3 overall, 1-0 in the UFC, with a split decision win over Elizabeth Phillips. She has an early career loss to Alexis Davis by split decision and Sarah Kaufman by TKO. Also, a split decision loss to Claudia Galdea in 2012. For Letourneau, I like the way that she strikes. She's very technical, good striking, and was able to come over early adversity in the Elizabeth Phillips fight. She was getting tagged a bit. Elizabeth Phillips came in pretty wild, and Letourneau was kind of able just to tune it down, keep on her game, keep crisp, and was able to pick up the decision victory. And in that fight too, her eye was swollen almost shut in the first round and just able to keep going. I like her will, and I like how she fought in her UFC debut. When you look at Jessica Rakoczy, 1-4 overall in mixed martial arts, one no contest, but she was the semifinalist in the Ultimate Fighter 18. Um, she defeated Roxanne Modafferi by TKO, just a vicious slam down, and Rakoczy just kind of capitalized, just beat the hell out of Modafferi after that. Defeated Raquel Pennington on the show by decision and ended up losing in the finals to Juliana Pena, who looks just awesome right now. She lost by first round to TKO. But obviously for Rakoczy, she just has great boxing, good experience. 33-3 and 1 no contest in her boxing career. And she also has a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. In this fight, both women are making their UFC strawweight debuts. But it's very hard to pick, in my opinion, because Letourneau hasn't fought in over 10 months, and Rakoczy hasn't fought since her loss to Juliana Pena, which will be about 17 months at the time of the fight. This one's pretty hard to pick in my opinion, but I'm gonna have to give Letourneau the edge because like I said, I like her heart. I think she'll be able to overcome in this fight. I like her striking, even though Rakoczy is the classic boxer. I think that Letourneau will be able to control this fight, and I'm gonna pick Letourneau by decision. Won't be surprised if it's a split decision because, like I said, this one could really go either way. And in the next bout, and the last one on Fight Pass, we have a welterweight contest between Nordine Taleb, minus 260 favorite, against Chris Clements, who is the plus 220 underdog. Nordine Taleb, 10-2 overall, 2-0 in the UFC. Also had two stints on the Ultimate Fighter, but was unable to win a fight on either show. But he is a product of the TriStar Gym in Canada. Obviously, those guys up there train well. They have good prospects coming out of there. Taleb has good ground control, but a tentative striking approach that I feel could leave him into some trouble against a guy who's a more explosive striker. A la we have Chris Clemens, 12-5, not great, but 2-1, one no contest in the UFC. Clements has had mixed success in the UFC, obviously, with wins over Vic Grujic. A good win over Vic Grujic actually put him away. Keith Wisniewski. Clemens lost to the up-and-comer Stephen Thompson, but he also lost by submission to Matt Riddle, but that fight was overturned after Riddle failed a drug test. The biggest flaw in Clemens' game, in my opinion, is his wrestling. He's able to be taken down and controlled fairly easily, and it showed in his last fight against Grujic, even though he did get the win in that one. Clemens shines on his feet, though, with 11 of his 12 wins coming by KO. To win this fight, I feel that Clemens has to come out aggressive and catch Taleb. Like I said, Taleb has that tentative approach where, I mean, he's a good fighter. He plays by the book, but if you got a guy coming at you like Clemens with KO power, he could really catch Taleb in this fight, I feel. And Clements, though, the problem with him is he doesn't really have the best gas tank. So if it goes to a grappling contest early, you're going to have to watch out for his conditioning, and I don't feel he'll hold the same power in the later rounds. And although I feel that Clements will lose this fight if it goes to decision, I feel like he's a fighter that needs a win right now. And I'm going to expect him coming out guns blazing against a timid Taleb. And I feel that Clemens could catch him in this fight. So I'm going to go with Chris Clemens by a first round TKO and my first upset pick of the night. In the next fight, and the first one airing on Fox Sports 1, we have a lightweight contest between Olivier Aubin-Mercier, the minus 350 favorite, taking on David Michaud, the plus 290 underdog. Mercier, 5-1 overall in MMA, 1-1 in the UFC. He defeated Jake Matthews and Richard Walsh on The Ultimate Fighter before losing in the finals by split decision to the winner, Chad Laprise. Mercier, for being so young, he has a very technical approach, good crisp striking, good cage control, and good ground control. And for only having 6 fights in his MMA career, He looks really good. He looks pretty polished, and he's taking on a fighter in David Michaud, who is 8-1 overall in MMA, 1-1 in UFC, lost a split decision to Li Jinglang, and defeated Garrett Whiteley by unanimous decision in his last outing. In that fight, he showed pretty good top control on Whiteley. He was able to stay on top of him, but not really mount much offense. Realistically, Whiteley did the most damage from his back with those elbows, eventually cut Mishad, and just, he was leaking pretty bad. The cut wasn't a huge factor in the fight, though, but just unable to really mount offense, but did have good ground control from the top. When they did stand up nearing the end of the fight, Mishad came pretty wild with his strikes. I think just trying to catch Whiteley, try to get the TKO finish, but obviously wasn't able to. Did get the decision win, though. But in this fight, I think that Olivier has the more technical striking, and they're both kind of up and coming fighters. But to this point, I feel that Mercier has been trained better, is just developing quicker, and I think that he's going to be able to be the better striker in this fight. I think when it goes to the ground, I think he'll be able to control Michaud over the course of 15 minutes, and that's why in this fight I like Olivier Aubin Mercier by unanimous decision. In our next fight, we have another lightweight contest with Chad Laprise, the minus 325 favorite, taking on Brian Barberina, the plus 265 underdog. Chad Laprise 9-0 overall, 2-0 in the UFC, also the winner of Ultimate Fighter Nations with the split decision over Olivier Aubin Mercier, and also holds a unanimous decision over Yodenis Cedeno. Um, I like Laprise. He has good forward pressure, good use of his leg kicks, really good ground control, crisp technical striking, but I feel he has a limited submission game. Has been on the top a little bit, not able to really work any submissions, but he does also have, if he's on the bottom, a good ability to get up from the ground and also standing when he gets in close. I like Laprise's clinch game, a pretty good clinch game. Taking on in this fight though, Brian Barberino, who's a tough cat, 10-2 in MMA, 1-0 in the UFC. Um, he had that win over Joe Ellenberger. Lost the first round, came back strong, listened to his corner, and ended up getting the finish in that fight. It was a great one. Like I said, Barberina has good forward pressure, but is susceptible to the takedown. Obviously, we saw Ellenberger take him down in that first round. But the thing I like about the kid is he has good heart, and shows like great corner awareness. Benson was calling out during the fight, telling him what to do. He's looking at Benson as he says it. Barberina was doing it that instant. It was just really good awareness of what his corner wanted him to do, and it helped to get him that win. In this fight, though, Chad Laprise has been growing since his UFC debut, training out of TriStar. His technique is just improving every single fight. Barberina, fighting out of the lab, though, like I said, just showed that great corner awareness in his fight. Obviously, can take direction well. He's growing as a fighter, too. But in that fight, I also feel that Joe Ellenberger just seemed completely exhausted. Had the first round. I thought he probably assumed he was going to coast through the rest of it, and he didn't. Barberina capitalized and took over and won that fight. In this one, though, I expect Chad to use his leg kicks pretty heavily, work in the clinch and work for that takedown near the ends of rounds to try to seal the round. I feel that Chad is the more technical striker in this one, and I feel he'll be able to keep his distance from Barberina and land his shots at will. So in this fight, I'm going to take Chad Laprise by unanimous decision. In our next contest, we have a women's bantamweight fight. Alexis Davis, the plus 165 underdog, versus Sarah Kaufman, the minus 190 favorite. Alexis Davis, 16-6 overall in MMA, 3-1 in the UFC. Decision wins over Jessica Ai, Liz Carmouche, Rosie Sexton, and then a KO loss to Ronda Rousey. Just absolutely demolished her. But who doesn't Ronda Rousey demolish? From Davis, though, she has good forward movement, good clinch striking, good submissions. She has good heart durability. She has so much scar tissue. It seems every fight she gets opened up. It doesn't seem to bother her. I like that about her. And she's shown decent takedowns and some decent top control too when she gets to the ground. But she'll have her work cut out for her in this one as she takes on Sarah Kaufman, who's 17 and 2 overall, 1 and 0 in the UFC with one no contest. Obviously, Kaufman has great striking, really good forward pressure, really crisp combinations. I mean, her boxing is on point. One of the better female boxers in the UFC. But she can be controlled at times against the cage and on the ground. The other thing about her is she really loads up on her strikes, heavy on her front foot. Um, she has good strikes against the cage, and she showed good striking, obviously, against Leslie Smith. Um, for this fight, though, they had an awesome fight in Strikeforce. Both these women fought before in Strikeforce. What a really good fight. They both went to war on the feet, where Davis, really didn't even have striking at that time. She struck pretty well with Sarah Kaufman, who was much better. But Davis had great control once the fight hit the ground. And I think that in this fight, Davis will be working that leg kick a lot more. Like I said, Kaufman very heavy on her front foot. I think if Davis can work in that leg kick, she could really slow Kaufman down and try to get on the inside and work for the takedown rather than stand and brawl so much like she did in her first fight. This is going to be a close one. Davis is the underdog in this fight, and everything I've read talks about Sarah Kaufman just getting another win here, but I really think that Davis in Canada could be a little home cooking. Who knows? I just think it'll be a close fight. I like Davis to come away with a decision, possibly a split decision, but I'm going to take Davis the underdog in this one. Our next fight is a welterweight contest between Patrick Cote, the minus 195 favorite, taking on Joe Riggs, the plus 165 underdog. Patrick Cote is 20 and 9 overall in MMA, 7 and 9 in the UFC. Obviously, Cote is a veteran of the sport, has been in the UFC for a long time, fought against Anderson Silva for the title, lost to Luter in the comeback series, but ended up getting up to fight Silva, blew his knee out, came back strong though, and he's nearing the end of his career probably, but that's why he's so technical. He has good ground control, great ground and pound from the guard, especially, which you don't see too often. He could really rain down some punishment from the guard. Has a good chin. I don't really know if it's holding up anymore. His last couple fights, he has been wobbled, but he's known for his chin. He has good takedowns and good striking, and also a 75-inch reach, which, could really help in a fight against Joe Riggs, who is also a striker. Joe Riggs, 40 and 15 overall in MMA, 4 and 5 in the UFC. Joe Riggs is good ground control, good submissions, and very powerful technical striking. That's the thing about Riggs, though, is that he does load up on his shots a lot, doesn't really work the jab as well as Cote does, and not as many leg kicks as I'd like to see from Riggs. And I feel the key in this fight for either fighter is just to make it a grueling grappling match. Cote, if he can get Riggs down and can rain some ground and pound from the top, I could see him just sitting there and doing that for the entire fight. If Riggs can get in the top position, he too has some good ground and pound, but he also has really good ground dexterity, and I could see Riggs working for a submission in any position, really. And I believe that Cote is a more polished fighter in this fight. Riggs is a veteran of the sport, but he has 56 fights, especially for being, I think Riggs is 32 years old only. He's taken a ton of damage, and he wears it. He really does. But I believe that in this fight, Cote will be more patient. I think he'll be able to capitalize on Riggs if he gets over aggressive, which we have seen from him. And I could just see in this fight Cote controlling the center, landing a few takedowns, and just working his way to a unanimous decision over Joe Riggs in this one. And our next fight is a bantamweight contest opening up the pay-per-view between Yves Jabouet, who is the plus 360 underdog, taking on Tomas Almeida, the minus 450 favorite. Yves Jabouet, 20 and 9 overall in MMA, 5 and 3 in the UFC. In the UFC, he's been knocked out by Eddie Wineland and Brad Pickett. Has a decision win over Michael Easton, but 3 of his 5 wins in the UFC are by split decision. One of which I believe he lost, but the other two, I think he did get the decision. Um, Jaboué has good striking and good striking avoidance, in my opinion. He's able to control the distance pretty well. He has really good kicks, some of the best in the division, in my opinion, because they're so untelegraphed. Good spinning technique, a good front leg roundhouse, just untelegraphed. He just comes up with it really quickly. He has decent takedowns, decent ground control, but he really shines in the striking department. But like when he won against Michael Easton, he took him down and he just kind of controlled him from there. It was a pretty good win for Jaboué. He's taking on in this fight though a very tough Tomas Almeida, 18-0 overall, 1-0 in the UFC, defeated Tim Gorman by unanimous decision. The kid, he's a really touted up and comer, superb striking, mixes up to the body and head just very well. Good kicks, but he is, in my opinion, susceptible to the takedown. He has a good gas tank. Poor head movement, though, I would say, for Almeida, especially in his fight with Gorman. He was able to kind of run in with those lunging jabs a lot, and he was catching Almeida with a jab. Um, the only thing about Tomas Almeida is that he has faced a very high lack of competition in Brazil. He fought a lot of local shows. A lot of his fights are against, local circuit guys who are 9-3, 9-4, 5-3. He's fighting a lot of guys who don't really have experience like a Yves Jaboué. And Jaboué, he might be a gatekeeper at this point, but he's good. He's a good fighter. I think this is a very, very odd line for this fight to have Jaboué such an underdog against a kid who, should he win the fight? Maybe, but Jaboué's been there before. He's going to come in with a good game plan, and I could really see Jaboué working his striking, working those kicks, getting in, getting a takedown on Almeida, and winning by decision, especially in his home country of Canada. So I think in this fight, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to take Yves Jaboué to upset the young up-and-comer Tomas Almeida. In our next fight, we have a catchweight bout between John McDessie, the minus 175 favorite, taking on Shane Campbell, the plus 155 underdog. John McDessie, 12-3 overall, 5-3 in the UFC, has some good wins in the UFC. A win over Darren Cruikshank, who was obviously a great striker. Sam Stout, he outstruck, and Hene Forch KO'd. That was a really good fight for McDessie. In his latest outing, lost a unanimous decision to Alan Patrick, but I really think that McDessie won that fight. I think a lot of other people feel the same way about it. Um, for McDessie, he has good forward pressure and just a great jab. I really think he has one of the best jabs in the division, utilized very well, especially in the Sam Stout fight and the Cruikshank victory. And obviously, his style for McDessie is that Taekwondo style. Very good kicks, doesn't telegraph them much. He's a good kicker and just great stand-up guy. In this fight, he'll be taking on Shane Campbell. 11-2. It's his UFC debut. Good kickboxing skills for Campbell. 62-9 as a professional kickboxer. Has the ability though to be taken down. Hasn't fought the best competition in my opinion, and his last win was over a fighter who was 5-3 coming into the fight, and Campbell lost the first round of that fight in my opinion. Campbell seems to win as his opponents start to let up. They aren't the best, like I said. McDessie has also fought a lot more experienced fighters, obviously being in the UFC. The problem for McDessie is he can be a slow starter, but once he feels a fighter out, he does a good job at slipping their strikes and countering. McDessie also has kickboxing experience where he went 22-0. Very good kicks. He disguises them well in his fights. And in this one, I feel McDessie will be able to keep the center of the octagon, work that jab. I think he's going to frustrate Campbell with that jab, and he's going to open him up to some good kicks from McDessie. I think McDessie is going to break Campbell in this fight. Campbell, like I said, just hasn't fought the type of competition like a John McDessie, who is a good fighter. I really like John McDessie in this one, so I'm going to go with him by unanimous decision, but I wouldn't be shocked if he does break Campbell and get that TKO. Our next fight is a middleweight contest between CB Dollaway, the plus 120 underdog, taking on Michael Bisping. CB Dollaway, 15 and 6, 9 and 6 in the UFC, has a TKO loss to Machida, a split decision loss, which I think he won anyway, to Tim Bosch, and a KO win over Cesar Ferreira, a unanimous decision win over Francis Carmon. CB Dollaway has been a great wrestler ever since he even got into the UFC, and he's continually been working on his striking, and he really showed it off against Fajeda. He caught him with a shot, put him out. It was a really good fight for Dollaway. I think he's been looking better as of late, despite that loss to Machida. I mean, you could write that one off for anybody. If you're not the top of the top, you're not going to beat Lyoto Machida. You're not going to beat Luke Rockhold. You're not going to beat Chris Weidman. So for where he is in the division, I don't really feel that loss is really that big of a deal. Um, his striking looks a lot better than it has, and mixed in with his wrestling, he could really be a dangerous opponent for anyone. And in this fight, he's taking on Michael Bisping, 25 and 7 in MMA, 15 and 7 in the UFC. Great boxing for MMA, in my opinion. Good dirty boxing, but he can struggle with fighters who have good wrestlers like Chael Sonnen and Tim Kennedy. He's more though of a cumulative striker in my opinion too. Not really a one shot power guy, but he does have some decent power. Just more of a cumulative striker like a Nick Diaz. I feel that the odds for this fight are right where they should be. CB Dollaway has looked really good as of late in the UFC, and if he's going to make a run into the top 10, it's going to have to start now with a guy like Bisping. Bisping, dating back to 2012, has alternated in losses and wins, most recently losing to Luke Rockhold. If you're superstitious, then you might want to go with Bisping because he's never lost back-to-back fights in his career. Bisping obviously has the more technical boxing approach, but you really can't write off Dollaway's power. I feel the best bet for Dollaway in this fight is to make it a grueling, grinding match up against the cage, work for takedowns, keep octagon control, and just secure Bisping for the entire fight. Bisping's best approach, in my opinion, would be to stick and move, use his superior boxing, and outbox Dollaway for 3 rounds. When I look at it, though, I feel that Dollaway will be able to weather some of Bisping's combos, work his way in, use that power, land enough, and get him to the ground for a 3 round decision. So in this one, I'm going to take CB Dollaway by split decision. In the next fight, the co-main event, we have a catchweight bout, 215 pounds. Quinton Rampage Jackson, the minus 300 favorite, taking on Fabio Maldonado, the plus 220 underdog. Quinton Jackson, 34-11 overall in MMA, 7-5 in the UFC. Obviously, everyone knows Rampage. Great KO power, good wrestling, good ground and pound, great top control, a good chin. But the problem with Rampage was always his gas tank, and especially at this point in his career, it's been very questionable. He hasn't won in the UFC in just about 4 years, and just a couple of his decisions have even been questionable. When you look at his win over King Mo, a fight that I think Mo did more, deserved the win, and Machida, I think Machida also defeated Rampage. Even when you look at Rampage, he might be nearing the end of his career, but he still has the potential to draw pay-per-view buys, and that's really why he's in here in the co-main event against a guy in Fabio Maldonado, 22 and 7 in MMA, 5 and 4 in the UFC. Some of the best boxing in the division, just very crisp boxing, good combinations, has a great jab. But he doesn't really have any big name wins. I think that's the problem when you look at Maldonado. He hasn't really ever gotten over the hump and beat someone in the top 10, but he certainly does have some entertaining fights. And Fabio Maldonado matches up well with fighters who are willing to stand and trade with him, but at this point in Rampage's career, I feel it would be pretty foolish of him to do so. I feel that this fight breaks down pretty simply. Rampage needs to work inside as much as he can, work for the takedown, and work on that ground and pound. Maldonado has to work his boxing like we've seen of him before, use his jabs, stick and move, and just try to keep away from Rampage. Don't get into a firefight with him. I feel that Rampage is going to be the one to execute his game plan better in this fight. I feel he'll be able to work inside, get Maldonado against the cage, hit him with some big shots, get him on the ground. And I'm hoping in this fight that we could see a revitalized Rampage who pushes for a stoppage. So I'm going to go with this one, Rampage round 2 TKO. Our next fight is the main event of the evening, the Flyweight Championship between Demetrius Johnson and Koyoji Horiguchi. Johnson, a negative 1,000 favorite over Horiguchi plus 650 underdog. Demetrius Johnson is 21 2-1, 9 1-1 in the UFC. When you look at a guy like Demetrius Johnson, he just really has it all. The best movement, in my opinion, in all of MMA. Just great striking, great ground control, good submissions, awesome forward pressure, and just an unlimited gas tank. This dude is just a guy who's just continued to develop, and he looks better every single time we see him in the octagon. He'll be taking on in this fight Koyoji Horiguchi, 15-1 overall, 4-0 in the UFC. Horiguchi is limited experience in the UFC, hasn't really faced the best competition. He's a fast starter though, has good kicks, good karate base, but a limited ground game and only one submission win. When I look at Horiguchi, I really do feel he's a legitimate prospect in this division, but the word prospect needs to be bold, highlighted, and underlined. He just hasn't fought quality opponents in the UFC to date, and I really think he's just getting thrown into a shark tank here with Demetrius Johnson. Johnson's going to be able to control this fight wherever it goes, but I'm really looking for him to take this one to the ground and work for a submission early. I see him getting it done pretty quickly, and in this one I'm going to have to go with Demetrius Johnson by a second round submission. And that concludes the breakdown for the UFC 186 card, but I'm still here to give you my gambling plays and predictions for this card. Like I said, it's not the most star-studded, but I really feel that there's some money to be made. I'm going to give my picks out in the form of units, so anyone listening with any bankroll size can determine how much they want to put on each fight. My first free pick is going to be Yves Jabouet. I like him in this fight. I talked about it earlier, how I just feel there's too much value here to skip this pick, so I'm going to go with a 2-unit play that would profit 7.2 units. For my next pick, it's going to be a parlay between Chad Laprise, negative 325 favorite, and Randa Marcos, the negative 260 favorite, for a total of minus 123. I'm going to go with a 3-unit play here, which will profit 2.44 units. The next pick is a parlay with John McDessie, negative 175 favorite, and Quentin Rampage Jackson, the negative 300 favorite, for a combined total of a plus 110 underdog pick. I'm going to go with a 2-unit play here, which will profit 2.2 units. And finally, my last pick is a straight bet for Patrick Cote, the minus 195 favorite. It's going to be a 2-unit play here, which will profit 1.03 units. For every event also, I just want to do something for fun. It's not going to count in my betting record, but it's just, something I do every once in a while. I just put up a $1 flyer, and it's just, a crazy pick. There's 9 people involved in this one, so this is $1 to win $140.35. We're going to go with Marcos, Letourneau, Laprise, Alexis Davis, Aubin Mercier, Patrick Cote, Yves Jabouet, John McDessie, and Quentin Rampage Jackson. Like I said, this is just, a $1 flyer, something to do for fun. I do it every event. I put $1 or $2 on a bunch of fighters just to try to see if it hits. Well, that's all for this show, folks, and thank you so much for tuning in to the first ever edition of the MMA Cash Cage. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at MMA Cash Cage, and also check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/MMA Cash Cage. Until next time, I'm your host, Tanner Martin, signing off.